Wednesday afternoon to you. It's 4 o'clock time for Sports4CLE. Thanks for joining us. Browns back on the field, getting ready for the Bills Sunday at 1 o'clock. Sports Illustrated's Albert Breer talked about Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry's future with the Browns.
My guess would be that Berry has a better chance to survive than Stefanski, just because for the reasons that you said. But I do think if they're going to get rid of one or the other, it's going to be part of like an overall look at where they're at structurally and everything else. And like, there's the natural question there too, right? Like, which is like, okay, well, we don't have, like we don't have Paul DePodesta here anymore. And they haven't planned on filling that chief strategy officer role. It hasn't been part of their plan. But I mean, there were a lot of questions when that happened, when DePodesta walked away. Like, would they move Andrew Berry over into the chief strategy officer role and then hire a GM separate from him? So I would think that like if they walked away from Stefanski and kept Berry, it would be part of like maybe like a restructuring of some part of some sort of iterate, like some sort to some degree. I'm just not sure exactly like how the bigger picture of it would all look, and I think that's something you got to consider when you're looking at all this.
The thing is it allows somebody who wants complete control to come in and get complete control, because if you move on from both of them, nobody's there. Former Browns offensive lineman John Greco with where he sees the state of the Browns right now.
I don't know if there's a quarterback in this year's draft, if there's a quarterback on the couch, if there's a quarterback in any locker room in this league outside of maybe one or two that can elevate the play of the guys that are around him right now on this Browns offense. And I hate to say that, but I just think it's true. Can Josh Allen come out and magically, throw 3 touchdowns a game to Jerry Jeudy and Harold Fannin? Maybe, and use his legs? Maybe. But it just looks so different. It's hard to give anyone a fair shake with the state of the offense and really the state of the team. The defense has been a little bit banged up, giving up big plays. The special teams has been a total disaster.
Yeah, all those are true, and no, you can't figure out anything about the offense. The line's bad and the wide receivers are bad. Rookie quarterback Shedeur Sanders met with the media today, talked about his chemistry and developing that chemistry with those wide receivers.
No, it's always going to be a work in progress. It's relationships. All relationships ain't always the best, but you still stick together through everything. So just because 1 week, we're well connected, and the next week we're a bit off, that don't mean that we didn't have progress. It's a lot of things in that game that there's positive things that we could take from that, when it comes to trust, when it comes to different things, learning abilities, and just different things that different tasks take forward, like when the game happens. So every moment, every rep, everything is extremely important on building our connection.
So in that Bears game, Sanders threw for 177 yards, no touchdowns. He threw 3 picks. One of them should have been a touchdown that Jerry Jeudy turned into a pick. Sanders talked about his performance.
I'm not really looking at the numbers. I'm looking at the wins, so that achieves everything. I talked to Jameis like a couple weeks ago, and then he went crazy. He threw for some crazy yards, but he was like, nah, bro, like, the most important thing is the wins, and having that guidance, having that knowledge, from a vet like him, it truly like helped me understand, a little bit more, I always knew, of course, winning, and that's the final goal. That's what everybody's in this league to do. So, you just got to focus on that. And the more plays you stack, the more completions you rack up, the better chance you have at winning. So, have I been playing winning football lately? Nah, I don't think so. But it's something I have self-evaluated and applied to my game.
We'll talk plenty of Browns coming up. Pete Smith from the Orange and Brown Report, as well as Sam Monson from the Check the Mike podcast. We'll also check in with Sam Amico. Some Guardians news. Not a big move, but a move nonetheless. Guardians acquired left-handed pitcher Justin Brule from the Toronto Blue Jays for cash. The back half of that, to get room on the 40, they designated Jhonkensy Noel for assignment. Still no major moves. Guardians adding some bullpen arms. that will not factor into the back end of the bullpen this year. Time for us to take a quick timeout. Sam Monson from the Check the Mic podcast up first. Sports for CLE talking Browns when we return.
You got so much to do, it's got you feeling blue. Put a little play in your day, 'cause it's fun all over the state. So come on, great games wait for you and me. The Ohio Lottery. Put a little play in your day. Put a little play in your day.
Browns are up first on Sports for CLE. Let's head right to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Hey, Dave Frank from Cleveland. After that Bears game on Sunday, how can you give Sanders a grade with that offensive line they put out there? And if any of those guys are auditioning on that offensive line, I'd give them a F minus. They didn't show me nothing on that right side of the line. Give me your thoughts, brother. You and the family be safe, brother. I love you. I'll be in touch.
As always, appreciate all of the voicemails. Let's welcome in Sam Monson from the 33rd Team co-host of the Check the Mic podcast. Sam, the offensive line had one starter, Joel Bitonio. It wasn't a good offensive line when everybody's healthy, which will tell you how bad it was against the Bears. But more curious about your thoughts, what you've seen from Shedeur Sanders.
Yeah, it's a rough offensive line. Shedeur Sanders, unfortunately, that's kind of his biggest weakness as a quarterback as well, is that he doesn't have a great relationship with helping an offensive line. You know, he's the type of quarterback that will hold onto the ball a little too long, that will try and extend plays back in the pocket and make the life of his offensive lineman a little bit more difficult than you would want. And, you know, that's sort of the opposite of what Dylan Gabriel was bringing to the table. But obviously what you gain by putting Shedeur Sanders back there is a guy who's willing to push the ball down the field and, you know, try and make some big plays to offset some of that. So, you know, this is the balancing act that they have right now, is you've got a quarterback who's going to be stressing the offensive line a bit, but he's going to attack deeper down the field, and he's brought an explosive element to this offense that wasn't there before. So, you know, right now, between the injuries in the offensive line, just the lack of talent in the wide receiver room, he doesn't have an awful lot of help around him, Shedeur Sanders. But he's also, his biggest weakness is not helping the picture either.
So take a look at this, and I know you've seen this. Browns offensive tackles registered season low 57% run block win rate against the Bears. Browns ran for 50 yards. 24 of them were the quarterback, Shedeur Sanders, which were scrambles. Lowest total since the 49 yards against the Bengals in the opener. We've talked since the beginning of the year. I know you thought this offensive line was old and not very good. How many of the problems with this offense are related to the offensive line and the wide receiver room, which is just as bad?
Yeah, I mean, it's all interdependent. You know, you can never sort of isolate any one of these units and take them away from everything else. It's all connected. The lack of receiving talent is making life difficult for a quarterback, and the quarterback is therefore holding onto the ball longer, and that's making the offensive line's job more difficult, and the whole thing is a sort of vicious circle. It's impossible to know, and that's the problem when you're evaluating young quarterbacks in a difficult situation, is there's really no way of being able to tell, you know, how much of the struggles are down to the other things and how much of them are inherent with a guy like Shedeur Sanders. And that was a big question mark heading into the season for somebody like Drake May in New England. Terrible offensive line, terrible receiving core last year. And we knew that he would get better this year with those things upgraded, but how much better? And that's always the X factor question. So I think it's unquestionably not helping Shedeur Sanders right now, the offensive line, the receiving core that he's throwing to, with the exception of really the other rookies, Harold Fannin, the guys in the backfield. But we don't know how much. You know, if you suddenly took those away and gave him, you know, a top 10 offensive line, a top 10 receiving core, how much better would that make his play immediately just by flipping that switch? And that's why this is always more of a an art form than a science.
When you look at Sanders, there's always, even in the Bears game, there was 3 or 4 throws where it's like, man, I haven't seen that in a long time from a Browns quarterback. Do you see that, or have I been looking at really bad quarterback play for a long time?
No, I think he's definitely flashed. Like, he's shown some impressive things. The problem he's dealing with is, he's working from such a low starting point in terms of the building's opinion of him. Whatever other people thought about him, and some people thought he was a first-round draft pick and stuff, clearly the Browns didn't. They passed on him. They passed on him a lot. They drafted a different quarterback ahead of him, and eventually in the 5th round, they just decided that the value was too good to pass up if it turns out that they're wrong and that Shedeur Sanders is better than they thought he was. But the problem is that means their initial impression of Shedeur Sanders is not particularly strong, and he doesn't have a lot of time to win them around, to take them away from, say, the top quarterback or a quarterback at the top of next year's draft that they're presumably going to have a shot at with the multiple first-round draft picks. So I think realistically, Shedeur is probably competing to show that he can be the primary backup for this team. But he's all he can do is go out there and show those flashes of high-end play, those explosive plays that, you're right, have been kind of absent from this team for a pretty long time now.
Can the offense be fixed in one off season with everything they need?
I mean, it's not going to become elite, I think, in one off season, but I think you can really patch it up and you can sort of fix the biggest weaknesses and make it, again, we're at the moment, I think it's pretty clear that both the offensive line and the receiving core are problems rather than helping the young quarterback. I think you can take that away and you can say, well, at least they're not problems right now. The offensive line should be able to be patched up easily enough in one off season. The receiving core, I think, could move in a very good direction quickly with the addition of, one high-end wide receiver, which may be at the top of the draft because of the likes of Harold Fannin and David Njoku, the tight ends. And, if you just find a number one wide receiver, suddenly I think that the totality of that receiving core would look a lot better fast.
All right, so before we go to break, former NFL defensive lineman Chris Canty on whether Kevin Stefanski or Shedeur Sanders has more on the line the final 3 games of the regular season.
Kevin Stefanski is a 2-time NFL Coach of the Year, and even though he hasn't covered himself in glory this season, if he gets clipped in Cleveland, he'll have another job, likely this hiring cycle, with all of the expected openings that we anticipate at the end of the regular season. With Shedeur Sanders, I don't know that he will have a better opportunity. I don't know that he will have a longer runway to prove that he belongs in terms of being a starting quarterback in this league. Now, the irony of that is Cleveland's commitment to their head coach could hinge on how committed they are to Shedeur Sanders and how committed they are in not drafting a quarterback at the top of the 2026 draft where they have 2 first-round draft picks. Because here's the deal. If you're thinking about drafting a quarterback with the first-round pick, you want to put him on the same timeline as the head coach. You don't want to have the head coach on the hot seat when you're drafting a quarterback in the first round. Ask the New York Giants how that's working out. So I will say this. I think Shedeur Sanders has more at stake because I do believe that Kevin Stefanski will have more opportunities if it doesn't work out in Cleveland to be a head coach. I don't know that Shedeur Sanders will have more opportunities, will be given a longer runway with another team, considering how polarizing people view him as a player.
So I think that's extremely fair. I think that's accurate.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, the unknown with Stefanski is how much of this season has gone to plan, because this is kind of my read of the quarterback landscape in Cleveland. This is basically exactly what I expected to happen, is that Joe Flacco would start the season, almost as an appeasement move to fans, to the veterans in the building, but that was never going to be a long-term solution for them. Then we would see Dylan Gabriel for a while, and then we would see Shedeur Sanders for a while. And ultimately, that would be enough to kind of get you to the end of the season, probably not in particularly good shape, and that's when you go and target the real quarterback in this draft. You've got multiple first-round draft picks. The way they drafted last year was sort of setting up for this offseason. And so if that was the plan all along, then Stefanski's done his job. He hasn't done anything crazy. He's done exactly what they would have been expecting. And everyone knows that really 2026 was the year they're actually going to try and move this thing in the right direction for real. So if that was the case, then I think he's fine. If, however, that wasn't the plan, and actually somehow, he had been convincing them that Joe Flacco was going to be the guy, and then, the whole thing has been sort of chaotic behind the scenes, well, then maybe his seat is a lot hotter than it could be, or his tenure there is a little bit more tenuous. I think Canty's right, though. Shedeur Sanders, this is his shot. He gets fifth-round draft picks do not get, endless opportunities to show that the entire NFL had it wrong. You basically get one look, and if you show something in that one look, then maybe you earn yourself a second look somewhere else. So this is Shedeur Sanders' shot. He gets a chance now in the final few games to, like I said, probably win himself a backup job in Cleveland, or at least a backup job somewhere else. I don't know that he can do enough, really, to be given a starting opportunity anywhere unless it's as a sort of bridge quarterback in Cleveland next year to the rookie that they drafted at the top of the draft.
Sam Monson from the 33rd team, co-host of the Check the Mic podcast. Now I'm going to step aside, take a quick timeout. We'll head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. Sports4CLE, be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Sam Monson from the 33rd team. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
All right, let's quit making excuses for Schwartz, Stefanski, and Andrew Berry. They all need to go. Special teams have been atrocious. They don't improve week to week. They get worse. Defense has gotten worse. I don't care about injuries. Schwartz's system was completely disclosed as a very simple defensive scheme. Quit making excuses for Stefanski. He's got to go. His game management and decision-making and play calling is embarrassing. Everybody knows what they're going to do, but enough excuses. Other teams can turn it around from worst to first. Why can't we? The fans deserve better. This is a freaking joke.
As always, appreciate all of the voicemails. Sam, that'll give you an idea of where Browns fans are with the regime right now.
Yeah, and look, that's where you end up when you don't win a lot of games. But I think you have to ask yourself, look, process versus results, and if you put a good quarterback on this team tomorrow, what would it look like? Or if you fixed a couple of things, what would it look like? This defense, there's some truth to the idea that it is a more simplistic defense than others. For example, Brian Flores in Minnesota is doing wildly more creative things than Jim Schwartz is doing right now with this Cleveland defense. But you could argue that the defenses are comparable in terms of production or in terms of ability or overall level. This has been a pretty high-level defense for 2 out of the last 3 years. I don't know that you necessarily say just because it had a bad game or because it is easy to diagnose and to identify, then you go in a different direction. We already talked about Stefanski. Andrew Berry, I think overall, it's a weird one because I think you can say in terms of the percentage of moves that he's made, most of them have been pretty good. Even this most recent draft class, so many of these rookies look fantastic. That is a good draft class overall from the looks of it. The problem is you don't have a quarterback right now. And the biggest move that he's ever made, the Deshaun Watson trade, has been arguably the worst move in the history of the NFL. So, and we don't know how much of that was him versus an ownership-driven decision. So, again, it's difficult looking at this and saying it's a bad team right now, therefore we got to clean house, we got to get rid of everybody. Because I think you can say, look, the defense is good generally, and 2 out of the last 3 years it's been very good. Stefanski has a proven track record of being a very good head coach, and we know he doesn't have a good offensive line right now. He doesn't have a good receiving core right now, and his quarterback is a fifth-round rookie. And then Andrew Berry, again, most of his decisions have been good, and the one that was by far the worst he's ever made might have been driven from above as well. So again, I come back to this idea of if this was the game plan going into the season, look, we're going to cycle through 3 quarterbacks, none of whom are particularly likely to be the guy long term because he's either very old or he's a day 2 or day 3 rookie. Just the strike rate of those guys is not good. So we're just going to get through this year. It's going to suck. We're going to suck. But next year, we're going to go draft a quarterback at the top of the draft, and we can put it together in that offseason. If that was the game plan, I think you have to let them at least attempt to do that this offseason. If that wasn't the game plan, then I think you have a much more reasonable case to start firing people.
So the place that I've come to, and people that are watching this are sick of hearing this, who's out there? And it's not a strong candidate list for potential head coaches. Here is one from the Ringer that went through, I think, 25 of them, and these are the top 8, and then we added a couple that are interesting. Robert Saleh, he's the 49ers DC, he has head coaching experience. Mike McCarthy got fired by the Cowboys. Cliff Kingsbury is the offense coordinator. He has head coaching experience. Then you got Brady, Spagnuolo, Minter, young guy, Monken, who was here as an OC, Ravens OC, Brian Flores. Then you got Bill Belichick, who is on that list. He's at North Carolina as the head coach, and Mike LaFleur, Rams offensive coordinator. We've had people mention John Gruden. Is there anybody out there that you think, man, that's really good? Let's see if there's nobody that intrigues me that much.
I think Flores and Kingsbury are interesting kind of second chance retread options. These are guys that failed as head coaches in varying ways, that their scheme ran a little bit stale as well. They then regrouped. They came back as coordinators. Their schemes as coordinators have been even more impressive than they were the first time around. And I think if you sat those guys down and sort of your interview was effectively a large part of that was, well, what went wrong first time around and what have you learned to stop that going wrong second time around? If you're won over by their answers, I think those would be intriguing candidates to give a second chance to. The problem with head coaching cycles is nobody knows who the good candidates are. Right now, you've got Schottenheimer over in Dallas looking like one of the better coaching hires of the year, and nobody even wanted to talk to him, let alone hire him. Like Jerry Jones was laughed at for hiring Brian Schottenheimer because it felt like it's Jerry Jones just being cheap. He's a guy that was already in the building. And yet right now he's getting rave reviews as, the leader of men and how good a job he's doing. The offense, his side of the ball has been spectacular. And nobody would have seen that coming. So much of being a head coach is stuff that we just don't get to see from the outside. You might have a good idea who's a good schematic mind and who can bring a good offense or a good defense to the table, but we don't really know who is going to be the correct leader of men, the correct administrator, the 5 other things that they've got to do in the background.
All right, before I let you go, we've talked about Browns need a lot. They probably need 4 starting offensive linemen, including 2 tackles and a quarterback and a number 1 wide receiver. 2 first-round picks. How do you balance, do you put those 2 picks together? Because you're probably going to have to go up to get the top quarterback. How does that all play out? And if you bring a quarterback in and you can't address the line and the wide receivers, what are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is going to be depending on exactly how the top of that draft plays out in terms of which teams are in which order, because a couple of the teams close to the top of the draft don't need quarterbacks, so they're going to be looking to trade out. One of the other ones, the Raiders, you could potentially argue they might be keen to trade out and not take a quarterback because of the ties that Pete Carroll has to Geno Smith, and maybe he thinks if he can rebuild things first, then maybe get a quarterback down the line, and Geno can still be a good quarterback. So, the Browns, I think, may have a pretty good chance of being high enough and then armed with enough draft picks to make that jump and go as high as they need to if it is a 1 quarterback draft. If you basically think it's Fernando Mendoza and that's it, you might have to get to number 1 to make that happen. But, they might have a different read on this draft class, and maybe they do like a quarterback that will be available lower down, and they only need to, spend 1 first-round draft pick to get their guy. I think given the way this season went, they have to go and get the quarterback. They've got to do whatever they need to do trade-wise throw whatever they need to make that happen and go get their guy. But you're right, that then becomes tricky in terms of, well, now how do we go get multiple offensive linemen, a high-end wide receiver from somewhere? And that's not easy. Maybe you've got to, trade next year's first-round pick into this year and try and double up with talent the way the Texans did when they drafted C.J. Stroud and then came back and got Will Anderson. Maybe you've got to try and do something like that. But, yeah, I think step one has got to be identify the quarterback, figure out a way of getting him. And then step two is how do we put enough talent around this kid that he doesn't fail immediately right out of the gate.
Sam Monson, thanks so much for the time and the insight. Appreciate it very much. Thanks, Sam.
No problem. Thanks.
Sam Monson, make sure you check him out, 33rd Team. He is the co-host of the Check the Mic podcast. Make sure you check it out. Really good stuff. Entire NFL, including the Browns. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. We continue talking Browns. Pete Smith from the Orange and Brown Report up next. Stay with us.
You got so much to do, it's got you feeling blue. Put a little flag in your day, 'cause it's fun all over the state. So come on, great games wait for you and me. The Ohio Lottery. Put a little flag in your day. Put a little flag in your day.
We continue talking Browns on Sports4CLE. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
The fan base pays the money. The fan base wants to watch good football. I don't care if you fire these two bozos we got running the show who've done nothing in 6 years. I don't care if you get a couple cutouts, one of Vince Lombardi and one of a good GM, and put them out there. If they win, we're happy. We don't want to be stuck with mediocrity. So you can't turn around and say the fan base has got to understand. The fan base understands. The two bozos we got running the show right now ain't going to win, guys.
As always, appreciate all the voicemails. Let's welcome in Pete Smith from the Orange and Brown Report. Pete, I guess that's my response is you got to tell me what we're going to. And I get the fan base wanting to move on. 3 wins in 2 consecutive years so far. That's going to get most people fired, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the bottom line is you don't have to make the case to fire anybody in the organization for the reasons you said. 6 wins and then the Deshaun Watson debacle are enough. But I would also counter by your exact point, which is, okay, then what? And unfortunately, they are sort of paying the price for the deal that they made with Deshaun Watson still. They're still sort of dealing with that. And then they've sort of engineered the team to operate a certain way, which is sort of setting them up for where they want to go, which is not fun to win with 3 games with, but might set them up for the long haul. And for a fan's perspective, that sounds like crap, and I totally understand it. But I think that's sort of the long-term vision the Browns have.
Yeah, and I get it. They've been bad this year. They've been the offensive line is much worse than I thought it would be. I know you wrote an article about the Bears game. What are your takeaways from that one? And I mean, I looked at the injury report on Friday. I'm like, oh, this is going to be rough, and it was about what I expected based on who was out there.
Yeah, I had the same reaction. I thought it was going to be a bad game, and look, the first quarter was ugly, but there's all this talk about no effort and whatever. I just saw a team that was just beat up and run down and just going against a very good Bears team. But my biggest thing watching that game was just being very jealous of the Bears and that offense, because certainly Ben Johnson is a really, really good offensive coordinator, but they're doing a lot of the things that the Browns did when they were good in 2020 and 2021, offensively, and the stuff that was fun, where they had a really good offensive line that moved people off the ball, 2 good running backs, and then they don't throw a ton, but when they do, it looks good. And just sort of wishing that and hoping that the Browns can get back to that, and just really getting to the hope that we know how bad the offensive line has been, and just sort of sitting there looking and going, can we please get back to having a good offensive line? And obviously that's been the task the Browns are going to have to address, but you're going to have to basically replace the entire group? And can you get a situation like the Bears do? Because it has unlocked everything. And the Browns defense, as good as it was, had a lot of difficulty dealing with just the amount of things the Bears could throw at him on that side of the ball.
Yeah, and you're right. The Bears retooled much of that offensive line in an offseason. The difference was they had a lot of cap space, so we'll see. Browns radio analyst Nathan Zagura on the special teams issues that the Browns continue to have all season long.
The Browns are going to have to get this figured out because you cannot continue to operate in a world in which that's a problem week in and week out. You know, this is a team that was going to be able to be successful because they ran the football. We haven't really been able to do that. Played great defense. Yes, for the most part, we've done that. Of late, it's been a little bit tougher. And then be neutral to good on special teams, and that has not been the case at all. We have really struggled on special teams week in and week out, and there's always a big return or a big negative play. It's frustrating, and I think that's, you know, one of the big reasons that the Browns are not in it right now, even though, listen, this team has got its issues clearly, but this division was ripe for the taking this year. And one of the reasons I think we're not in that mix where we're still playing meaningful football is simply because the special teams have not been up to par.
Peter, I would say teams that don't have a wealth of talent struggle on special teams because that's the back end of your roster. Is it as simple as that, or young guys? Bubba Ventrone's, he's not winning any points by having continual breakdowns, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, as far as Bubba Ventrone goes, look, I'm fine with him staying on until the end of the season, and then he's got to go. But and I'm not going to sit here piling dirt on him, whatever. As far as the talent element goes, look, I think part of this is to what you're talking about is how young they are. And it's not just that they're young. You've got a lot of rookies who are, you know, obviously not as physically developed as they're going to be in year 2 and year 3, whatever. But I think also it's the amount of rookies that they are trying to teach a lot of stuff at once. Let's use Gage Larvadain as an example. Gage Larvadain is the punt returner, but he's also in the offense. He's not just, that's not his only job. He's not just a guy who's there focusing on special teams, which there are teams, and there have been Browns teams where that has been, they've had guys who are mercenaries that do just that role. In fact, they signed DeAndre Carter to be a kick returner, and then obviously he got hurt. Aiden Huntington, obviously he's injured right now, but they had him as a rookie defensive lineman / fullback / guy who plays a whole lot of special teams. And you look throughout the roster, there's a whole lot of these guys. That's not an excuse, but it does sort of help to explain that, like, they aren't just bringing in guys and going, you are here to play special teams. And if you learn a little bit about the offense or learn a little bit about defense, great. They've had some of those guys. They're actually asking these guys, whether it's Malachi Corley, whether it's Gage Larvadain, all these guys to take on real roles in the offense or defense and learn this. And I think at some point, like, there's a little bit of an overload and you can get some of those details lost. But, I still think ultimately you're going to have this fall on the coordinator, because the other problem I have with the special teams unit is that one small mistake just seems to absolutely kill them. It's never there's never cover for that. And I get on some level they're working on thinner margins, but it's weirdly thin with the Browns, and just how one mistake just absolutely kills them.
Yeah, the number of 20, 30, 40-yard returns is ridiculous. All right, let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Hey, what's up, Dave? Taylor from Columbus. You mentioned Zach Zinter being a miss. And I said in the chat that I was going to call and ask you about that. Where is he? Why doesn't he play? I know he's had a few injuries since he's been drafted, but is he really a miss? Was he that bad of a draft pick? Can you please elaborate and tell us what's going on with Mr. Zinter?
As always, appreciate all the voicemails. Pete, I think you and I have talked about this. He's a guy that hasn't been able to get active on most days when there's healthy linemen. That's a pretty good indication he's not close to being ready to play and would be a miss as a third-round pick.
So earlier in the year, there was a plausible excuse, which is they had Joel Bitonio, they had Wyatt Teller, and Tevin Jenkins was your next guy up. So as the fourth guy, you'd naturally be inactive, and you could sit there and go, well, he's developing. And then this past week, unfortunately, Zinter got hurt, so they were thin, and then he couldn't play, so he couldn't really test himself. The overall issue with Zach Zinter, in my view, is that they switched offensive schemes. for Deshaun Watson to try to get something out of that investment to make it work. They made the change. The coordinators, offensive line coach, they went to a more gap-heavy scheme, and they drafted Zach Zinter. They do that for 1 year, then immediately bailed on it. And then Zach Zinter's suddenly in a scheme that doesn't make a whole lot of sense for him. Now, I think some of that is just that Zach Zinter's probably not very good. Overall, I think it's probably reasonable that the Browns are going to bring him back next year just to see if in year 3 something clicks for him and he gets better. Maybe it's at center. But I am sort of expecting that whether it's sometime in the offseason or like August, they're probably going to trade him for pennies on the dollar as just a guy that does not work in this scheme, assuming everybody's still in place here, that they will then just move on to the next one. And there's a part of me that wants to make that move quicker just because I sort of have this theory of the case that I think they should use all of their roster space that they're going to have with the offensive line to take as many swings as possible this coming offseason to sort of tackle that group.
And to be fair, I liked the pick when he was coming out of Michigan. I thought he was going to be better than he is. So I will take that one as one I was wrong on. Carson Schlesinger, take a look at this. 14 tackles against the Bears, career high, most single-game tackles by a Brown player since 23. Recorded double-digit tackles 5 straight games, double-digit, and 6 double-digit tackle games this season. The guy just keeps playing and doing really good things. So again, that was a spot top of the second round where I wanted a wide receiver. They got a really good linebacker top of the second round. I'll admit that.
He is obviously. I agree with you. I was hoping they would take premium positions with the second round picks. Offensive line, wide receiver, those more difficult to hit picks. But if you're going to take a linebacker and you get the return you're getting from Carson Schlesinger, you're going to be absolutely ecstatic with it. He's been better than we could have imagined. I think he's going to run away with Defensive Rookie of the Year. I think he warrants a trip to the Pro Bowl, and I think All-Pro is in his future. I would also note this. Watching that game against the Bears, that's the first time I've seen him get run over and moved by a running back, which to me is sort of a barometer and where I was sort of watching and going, oh, that's sort of an indication that this team is getting a little bit tired, a little bit worn. And that was sort of the way I viewed the game. Like nobody, I don't think anybody's going to question Carson Schlesinger's effort for this football team, but you're starting to see the little wear and tear. This is a guy who put Derrick Henry down on the ground without issue. He put Ashton Jeanty, just dumped him on the ground. And then the Bears running backs, who are very good, DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monangai, just seemed like they were getting to him a little bit more than anybody else has. And I think it's just sort of the wear and tear of the season on this group and why I don't get too caught up in the effort and think it's just sort of where they are in the year.
Pete Smith from the Orange and Brown Report and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, we'll head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. Sports for CLE. Be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with Pete Smith from the Orange and Brown Report. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Hey, Dave. Frank from Cleveland, couple things. Seems like Stefanski's like sort of coaching his way out of Cleveland. You know what I'm saying? By not having a team prepared, still getting all the penalties. Maybe that Giants job looking attractive to him with Jackson Dart over there. Number 2, I would promote Jim Schwartz, head coach. / he got to retain the defensive coordinator job. I'm telling you, hand the reins over to offensive coordinator, run the show, that kid Tommy Reese. And then I would keep Barry. I don't know, a lot of people don't like Barry, but I do. All right, Dave, let me know your thoughts, brother. God bless you, and I hope you're getting prepared for the holidays, and I'll be in touch.
As always, appreciate all the voicemails. Pete, it's kind of interesting. There are all kinds of thoughts out there. What are your thoughts relative to Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Barry?
I've said all along, you don't need a justification to fire them. I wouldn't. And look, just addressing what the caller's talking about, the first quarter of that game was ugly, and the penalties don't look great. But penalties have not been a conversation for several weeks. This was a whole thing early in the year with a young team. Everybody kept complaining, oh, they're undisciplined. They've basically become a middle of the pack team in terms of penalties, and the preparation has been better. They've got young guys who are figuring it out, and by and large have been. They're getting better. They're not great, and they certainly need more talent, specifically on the offensive side of the ball. But I don't understand how this team gets better by just removing Kevin Stefanski and keeping everything else. And I run into this a lot. There are a whole lot of people who do not want to lose the assistant coaches on this team, but want to make a change. And I'm just left to believe that they don't really want to change anything other than maybe they don't like how Kevin Stefanski does press conferences or any of that other stuff, but they just want this group to do better. And if they stick it out and can do the things they need to do on offense, get a line, get another premium receiver, figure out a better quarterback situation, they will win games. And if they do it really, really well, if they were to knock it out of the park the way they sort of did with this past offseason, they have a chance to not only just be a better team, they're a team that's going to potentially compete for the playoffs. That's how they've sort of set this thing up. Now, it's a huge amount of pressure for them to deliver, but that is the thought process. But I run into this a whole lot with people who are just like, I want to get rid of one guy but keep everybody else, and that's not really how it works. And I certainly don't want Jim Schwartz to be the head coach of this team. And even with him, look, I think Jim Schwartz is a very good coordinator, but whether it was the Titans game or certain things, I largely credit the Chicago Bears offense for executing as opposed to the Browns defense being bad, and they had some injuries and stuff. But there are times when people get very frustrated with Jim Schwartz as a coordinator as well, and you're ultimately just going to get to a point where you're just mad at him instead of mad at Stefanski.
Yeah, I guess the question I have is, if you're going to replace Jim Schwartz, you hear Brian Flores, you hear Robert Saleh. What's the difference between those two guys and Jim Schwartz? They've both had shots at head coaching, haven't done well. They're defensive coordinators who are doing well. I don't see the real difference between them. Do you see where I'm going with that?
Well, I'll just go to the Brian Flores point, and people seem to have amnesia with this. When he was the head coach of the Miami Dolphins, he terrorized Tua Tagovailoa. Every day he told him how awful he was. He was pissed that he wasn't Justin Herbert. This was a huge problem, and it ultimately cost him his job. He was a really good defensive coach. They got rid of him. They obviously brought in Mike McDaniel, and Mike McDaniel had a ton of success with Tua. But you cannot have a head coach do that, and you're talking about a team that needs to fix the offense and needs to get a young quarterback, and that's the guy you're talking about hiring. And you can tell me, oh, he's learned and all these other things. That is a terrifying prospect to be like, yeah, I want to hire the guy who terrorized the young quarterback he had the last time he was head coach.
Well, when you put it like that, it doesn't make a lot of sense. All right, let's for a minute assume, and it's a big assumption, nobody really knows, assume they move on from Kevin Stefanski. What are you looking for in the next head coach?
Yeah, I mean, look, the easy answer is to say you need to get an offensive guy to build the offense. I still think the focus has to be on get a good head coach first and figure out the rest. And that is going to be a challenge just by virtue of I don't think this is a good field to hire in right now. I think most of the guys you're hearing about are guys like Clint Kubiak, who I think he's done a fabulous job with the Seattle offense. I don't know if he can be a head coach. I couldn't pick him out of a lineup as a human being. The guys that I think are going to be really attractive for head coaching jobs are largely retreads. Vance Joseph is going to be, I think, one of the biggest stars in the coaching search, who has done this and failed. Though if you're the Browns, he makes a lot of sense because he does a lot of things very, very similar to Jim Schwartz does. I think he does certain things better than Jim Schwartz, but that's sort of the challenge. Is I think that part of it is also going to frustrate a whole lot of people. Is that if they hire a defensive head coach needing an offense, then everything shifts to who they hire as the coordinator and all these other things. So I think it's just a really challenging situation. I've heard Robert Saleh's name, and I like Robert Saleh, but his high water mark with the Jets was 7 wins. And you're going to sit there, well, the Jets are a bad organization, and I'm going to sit here, okay, we're talking about the Cleveland Browns. You need to have somebody who can sort of navigate these issues. So Again, these are people I genuinely like. I think Robert Saleh is a good coach, but that's a tough deal to be like, hey, we're going to get rid of the guy who had 11 wins. The only other coach to ever do that for this team is Paul Brown, and we're going to replace him with a guy whose high water mark is 7.
The other thing is, that kind of goes to my next question. Is this an attractive job? I mean, I guess there's only 32 of them, but if you're a hot candidate and you're looking at the Giants, they got Jackson Dart. If you're looking at the Raiders, they're probably going to have the number 1 overall pick, unless they come back and win a couple of games, which isn't likely. How attractive is the Browns' job in the vast sea of head coaching openings?
It's more attractive than the Raiders. That's about as far as you can go right now. And a lot of this is a very this year problem, because let's say you fire everybody and you're saying we're going to try to get a head coach, and the head coach comes in and goes, okay, what are you offering me? Well, you still have to have Deshaun Watson on the team. Like, there's nothing we can do about that. You've got him for another year. And by the way, there's going to be a whole lot of people who are pissed if you get rid of the 5th round pick from last year. And even though you probably want your own guy, and like, there's a whole lot of these problems. So the cap situation isn't as bad as people think it is, but it's still there. Deshaun Watson is still there. You do have to fix all of these problems that you have with the offensive line, quarterback, and receiver. That's a large undertaking. I think it can be done, but the problem you run into is if you are you then going to sort of give grace to the first-year head coach who struggles and doesn't do well, or are you better off sort of staying with what you have right now? I think in a year this job gets a whole lot more attractive if you're trying to think in those terms, because Deshaun Watson will be out of the door. You're going to be much farther out of his contract and be in a better spot there. You should have a lot more talent on the offensive side of the ball, because you will have sort of moved on from a lot of these linemen. You'll have guys like Harold Fannin and Dylan Sampson and Quinshon Judkins who are going to be a little bit older and be larger pieces of the offense. But, this year, I think it's a really tough sell. And the argument that there are only 32 jobs does not hold water in terms of getting the guys you want. And we just saw those. I'll use Ben Johnson as an example. Ben Johnson, and there were certainly reasons why he waited, young children and all these other elements, but he knew he was going to get the job he wanted. He knew he could basically have his pick of the litter, and he waited for the right job for him before making that move. So if you're sitting there going, and I've heard names thrown out there, Notre Dame's head coach, various other shoot for the stars type head coaches who are never going to want this job right now. And then, so ultimately you probably end up in a situation where you're basically hiring, he's a very nice man, and I don't mean to disparage him, but you're basically hiring the next Freddie Kitchens, where you're basically going, I'm going to hire a guy and I'm already thinking about the next head coach after him.
All right, before I let you go, what are the offseason priorities then? Obviously, you need a quarterback. You need a lot of linemen. You need a wide receiver. If I've said, and if you're picking 4th, you better love the quarterback that is sitting there, because I don't think you can afford to try to move up unless you have a can't-miss franchise kind of guy, and I don't see one of those coming out.
Well, even if you do, I'm with you 100% right now. Let's put it this way. Did you watch football this last weekend or this whole season? The amount of guys who have had picks packaged for them, Micah Parsons, Sauce Gardner, obviously the Browns with Deshaun Watson, it just seems like packaging picks just seems to put a voodoo curse on these guys, like Final Destination, where the injury is coming for you, and it's going to be severe, and it's going to kill your franchise. The Indianapolis Colts are sitting there going, I have no idea what we're going to do. The Atlanta Falcons, who traded their picks, I have no idea what we're going to do. So I'm right there with you as far as that goes. Priority number 1, as much as the quarterback is always going to be a thing, I think it's the offensive line. Kevin Stefanski, if he's the coach, has had success when they've been able to block, even when they have not had premier quarterback play. And the other part of that is, yes, quarterback is the most important position and can fix a whole lot of things for your team. It's one guy versus 5. And in the Browns case, I'm hoping it's more like they're looking at 8 to 10. They need to get as many guys who can try to block as possible and figure out the best 5 and get that going. So that's got to be huge. But the whole thing just amounts to simply offense. They have running backs. They seem to have tight ends, and hopefully they're going to re-sign David Njoku or figure out something else to go with that. But is it. Like, and I'm higher on Jerry Jeudy than most people, but nevertheless, another premium wide receiver would be great for this team. It just boils down to just make the offense better. And I think that's doable. It will not be easy, but it can be done.
Pete Smith, as always, great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Pete.
Thanks for having me.
Pete Smith, make sure you check him out. Really good stuff. He writes for the Orange and Brown Report. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. We turn our attention to the Cavaliers. Sam Amico from hoopswire.com straight ahead. Stay with us on Sports4CLE.
You got so much to do, it's got you feeling blue. Put a little flag in your day, 'cause it's fun all over the state. So come on, great games wait for you and me. The Ohio Lottery. Put a little flag in your day. Put a little flag in your day.
We turn our attention to the Cavaliers, getting ready to face the Bulls in Chicago tonight. Cavs with a 15-12 record, 7th in the Eastern Conference. ESPN's national NBA analyst Brian Windhorst on if the Cavs could trade out of the second apron.
It is true that if you do a trade and on the other side of it, you're out of the second apron. In other words, after the transactions happen, you emerge out of the second apron. You can do that type of trade. You would need to take to really do a complex trade to do it. I will say though that there are rules on the other side of the spending, which is that there are teams at the bottom who, if they don't spend a certain amount of money, that they face CBA retribution. So like a team like Brooklyn, for example, I think is only a couple $100,000 below the salary floor. So, if you're looking for something, you're saying there's a chance. It's not impossible. But again, the concept of you constructing a trade where on the other side of it, the Cavs are a better team.
Yeah, that can't happen.
Don't give me a 13-team, 46-player trade that requires 6 whiteboards and 3 people with computer science degrees to prove that there can be a trade. Yeah. Okay, congratulations, you've done it. Good job, buddy. Good job using the trade machine. Tell me the trade that makes the Cavs better.
Let's welcome in Sam Amico from hoopswire.com, Full Court Cleveland. Sam, I know you kind of wrote an article about the Cavs' ability to make a trade. Take us through. Second apron restricts everything that you can do trade-wise. That's why they're trying to talk about trading out of it. Take us through the article you wrote, though, about Cavs making a trade and how they're limited.
Yeah, we call it the second apron. What it really is a hard salary cap, and you can't maneuver past this cap, and the Cavs are already over that for the most part. So, as Brian said, it's not impossible to get out of that situation, the financial handcuffs or stranglehold that they're in, but it would take a lot of creativity on their part, especially when you're talking about a trade that would move the needle. I think that the Cavs, if they want to get out of that cap, and by all accounts, you do want to get out of that, but, not at the expense of winning a title. And right now they don't look like title contenders, but they still believe that they are. And I just think, sometimes what you're not going to do is make a trade for the sake of a trade or just to get out from underneath that hard cap. So they're very, very much handcuffed in what they can do. But this is the NBA, and, where there's a will, there's a way. And we've seen Kobe Altman have a will before. So if he feels like they're going to want to make a deal, they could, as Brian said, you could rope in 4 or 5 other teams. Or we saw Kevin Durant get traded over the summer. I think it was a 6 or 7 team deal. So I don't think that's a sense of urgency for them right now, but it may be before the February 5th trade deadline.
All right, so the other thing you wrote an article about is some of the teams mentioned in conjunction with Darius Garland. Wizards, Magic, Timberwolves, all kind of want Garland. Take us through that article, what that would look like.
Yeah, they would have, those three teams, particularly the Timberwolves, have really been expressing a lot of kind of calling the Cavs, and the Cavs are like, no, but Minnesota is really in the hunt for a point guard, dynamic point guard to put next to Anthony Edwards. Obviously, Darius Garland is that type of player. They just don't have a whole lot. Washington is another team that's kind of looking for a young face of the franchise. They've got a lot of young players, but, are any of these guys going to be future repeat All-Stars? Probably not, the way it's looking now. So, Washington has a ton of assets. Michael Winger is their head of basketball operations. He's a Cleveland native. He used to work for the Cavs. He has a relationship with Kobe Altman. Those things could come into play. The Cavs are saying no right now to everybody, by the way. They're not ready to trade Darius Garland. But, Washington, Minnesota, Orlando was the other team that was mentioned. And Orlando's had an interest in Garland since before the start of last season. As we get closer to the trade deadline, if teams start calling the Cavs more and seeing where the team goes and where Darius Garland goes, maybe the Cavs will be willing listeners, but right now they're not. But those are the kind of teams that all of a sudden they're going to maybe put a little bit of a full court press on the Cavs, especially if they continue to play like they have been.
All right, so 12-15, 7th place in the Eastern Conference, just 3-6 in their last 9. Again, it's getting, I know you wrote about this, it's getting hard to defend the slide now. It's becoming 10 games is eighth of the schedule, roughly.
Yeah, if it were just injuries, then maybe you could say, well, they're fighting injuries, and they are. I mean, Evan Mobley, they get Jared Allen back, Evan Mobley goes out. Darius Garland, to me, looks as if he's still kind of finding his rhythm, although he had a really nice game against the Hornets the other day, though that resulted in an ugly home loss in overtime. So, I think there's – and Max Strus and Sam Merrill being out hurts them in the sense that those are guys who do the intangibles, and that's where they're getting beat is the intangibles department, the loose balls, the blockouts, the overall intensity, which are things Strus brings and Merrill even to a smaller degree. So there are injuries, but they're also, there's kind of a locked-in issue where they're not doing those small things and not doing the fundamentals and relying on Donovan Mitchell too much, and it's come back to bite them. So, the troubling part of that, Dave, is they had a week off to kind of get things right, and then they come back, and all of a sudden, as Chris Fedor at cleveland.com wrote, they were down 17 points in back-to-back games against the Wizards and the Hornets. So I think that, there's a lot of things at work here that are going wrong, and they're easily correctable. It's just kind of an effort thing. So, the good news is they're only a few games out of second in the Eastern Conference, have been playing terrible. You put together a 5-6 game winning streak or win 6 out of 8 or something, all of a sudden you're right back in contention for number 1 seed.
Is it fair to say, this is probably the most challenging stretch for Kenny Atkinson? He didn't have many challenging stretches last year, first year as head coach of the Cavs, but challenging stretch for him. What do you think his message is to this team? It's a team that's got young players but young veterans on it.
Yeah, he's really a player's coach where he's kind of like, we got to do these things better. We got to clean these things up, but keep fighting through it. I believe in you guys. It's not like Greg Popovich where he's shouting proclamations throughout the gym and they're booming off the walls. Kenny Atkinson he understands. He's been around the NBA a long time, was with the Warriors when they won that championship in 2022. And if you remember, that Warriors team had some serious struggles during the regular season. So there's no sense of panic, but there is a sense of, hey, listen, we're better than this. We got to clean it up. And I think that we will. But, it's not warning bell time, but it's starting. That time is starting to warm up a little bit, and I think Kenny Atkinson realizes that. But he's also far from panicked and realizes, look, we can put together a 7-game winning streak in March. It doesn't have to happen right now, and we're going to be in good shape. So I think that look, this is way less than ideal, but at the same time, this truly is a marathon, and it only takes one really good stretch, and all of a sudden everything changes for the better.
Well, you're getting close to Christmas. That's when everybody starts paying attention to the NBA. How's Donovan Mitchell been? That's a guy that really, he's played pretty well. He's played really well, but he hadn't gotten a lot of constant support.
Yeah, right. And that's the word I would use. He's been the one constant now. He struggled shooting the ball against the Hornets the other day. But, in terms of just effort and putting the team on his back, and the Cavs don't want to ride that cape too much because that's not going to get them places in the postseason. But now it's nice to have a guy who can do that. He's been spectacular. There's no doubt about that. But you're right. I mean, the supporting cast shouldn't be as much of a supporting cast as they've been. This is almost like Michael and the Jordanaires, which again is not going to get you places in the postseason. So they're very much trying to get some consistency from some other, whether it's Garland or, Jalen Tyson at this point, obviously with Mobley out. They've got to find what we saw last year, Dave, was they were 5 guys kind of operating as a fist, and now it's kind of been Donovan Mitchell and hopefully someone else steps up, not just offensively, but in terms of effort and defense. And, they're still searching for that. And I don't even think they know why it's not happening at this point. But I think once it does, then sailing will be a lot smoother.
Yeah, and again, Christmas is the time where everybody starts trying to get things rolling towards the end of the season, middle to the end of the season. Sam Amico is always great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Sam.
All right, thanks for having me, Dave. We will talk to you soon, I'm sure.
Appreciate it. Sam Amico, make sure you check him out, hoopswire.com, as well as the co-host of Full Court Cleveland, always really good and insightful Cavs coverage. That's going to do it for this edition of Sports for CLE. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow at 4 on Sports for CLE.